I spent 30 years sitting behind a bench, listening to people tell me the most intimate failures of their lives. Husbands who swore on their children's names they'd been faithful. Wives who wept so convincingly I almost believed them before the evidence told me otherwise. Adult children who claimed they loved their parents while quietly draining their bank accounts. I heard every variation of deception a family can produce, and I learned early that the most dangerous lies aren't the dramatic ones. They're the quiet ones. The ones people have been rehearsing so long, they no longer sound like lies at all. They just sound like the way things are. My name is Dorothy Callahan. Most people who know me call me Dot. I'm 67 years old, retired 3 years now from the family court bench in the city where I was born and raised, and where I buried my husband Robert 12 years ago. I have one son. His name is Marcus, and he is the finest man I have ever known, which is not something most mothers can say about their children without embellishing. I am saying it as a woman who spent 3 decades evaluating human character for a living. What happened in my son's kitchen on a Thursday afternoon last October is not the kind of thing I have a tidy way to begin. So I'll begin the way I always began a complex case, not with the conclusion, but with the moment I first understood that something in front of me did not add up. I had let myself in with the spare key Marcus keeps under the ceramic pot on the back step, the one shaped like a frog that his son Eli painted at a birthday party 2 years ago. I wasn't expected. I'd been nearby for a dentist appointment and had picked up a casserole from the place on Birch Street that Marcus loves, the kind of unannounced visit that a retired woman with too much time and a son who doesn't eat properly feels entirely justified in making. Serena's voice reached me before I even set the dish down. She was in Marcus's study at the end of the hall door, half open, speaking in the low, careful register people use when they believe no one else is home. "He still doesn't know," she said. "Keep it that way until after the holidays. I need more time." I stood in that kitchen with a casserole in my hands and felt something shift behind my sternum. Not alarm, not yet. In 30 years on the bench, I learned to recognize the specific quality of silence that follows a sentence spoken in secret. This was that silence. I set the dish on the counter. I did not call out to announce myself. I simply waited until I heard her hang up, and then I walked back out the way I'd come, leaving the casserole behind, and sat in my car in the driveway for 11 minutes before driving away. I want to be precise about what I felt in those 11 minutes. Not panic, not even grief. Something older and more disciplined. The feeling of a door swinging open onto a room you hadn't known existed, and understanding instinctively that you needed to see the whole room before you decided what to do about it. Marcus had been married to Serena Voss for 9 years. She was a pediatric surgeon, brilliant and composed, the kind of woman who moved through a room like she had already decided exactly what was going to happen in it. I had liked her. More than liked her. I had trusted her with my son, which is a category of trust I do not extend easily or often. Her brother Derek had become Marcus's business partner 4 years into the marriage. The firm they'd built together, Callahan Voss Architecture, had won regional awards and a client list that still sometimes surprised me when Marcus mentioned names over Sunday dinners. I had watched Derek and Marcus grow into something closer than colleagues. Marcus called him the brother that life forgot to give him. I thought about that phrase a great deal in the weeks that followed. I did not confront Serena. A lifetime in courtrooms had taught me one unbreakable rule: you do not show your hand before you have seen theirs. Instead, I began to watch. Carefully unhurried the way I had always watched witnesses on the stand, looking not for the obvious tells, but for the small inconsistencies. The pause before an answer that should have come quickly. The look exchanged between two people who believe no one is tracking their eyes. Marcus and Serena hosted Thanksgiving that year, the whole extended gathering that had become tradition. My sister, Frances, 3 of Marcus's college friends, and Derek, who arrived with wine and a warmth that I now watched from a different angle than I had before. It was the way he looked at Eli, not the way an uncle looks at a nephew. Something quieter than that. something that carried its own weight in a way I couldn't quite name, but couldn't unfeel once I'd noticed it. I need to tell you about the email account. A year before any of this, Marcus had asked me to print some architectural files while I was house-sitting during a trip he and Serena took for their anniversary. He'd written down the login for the family shared account on a notepad by the printer, the way people do when they trust someone completely and don't think twice about it. I still had that notepad in my kitchen drawer. I want to be honest, I sat in front of my laptop for a long time before I typed anything. What I was about to do sat in a complicated place between protecting my son and violating the privacy of a woman I had no confirmed evidence against beyond a single overheard sentence and the instinct of an old woman who had spent her career learning to trust her instincts. I typed the login. I held my breath. The email I found was not recent. It was 14 months old, buried in a folder labeled with a string of numbers that meant nothing at first glance. A forensic accountant would have found the financial trail. What I found instead was a medical document forwarded from a laboratory addressed to Serena Voss Callahan. A paternity result. Eli Marcus Callahan, age 4 at the time of the test. Probability of paternity for the named potential father, 0.00%. Marcus was not Eli's biological father. I closed the laptop and sat at my kitchen table until the light through the window shifted from afternoon into evening. I did not cry. I am not certain why, except that grief, when it is large enough, sometimes moves past tears into something more fundamental, a recalibration. The feeling of the floor becoming the ceiling, and understanding that you have to find your footing again before you can do anything else. I knew what I had to do. I had known since the moment I read it. I had spent 30 years making decisions in cases exactly like this one, deciding what the truth was worth and to whom it was owed. Now the case was my own family, and the answer was the same as it had always been. Marcus deserved to know. Deserved. I called my attorney the following morning, a woman named Patricia Hale, who had clerked for me 20 years ago, and whom I trusted completely. I told her what I had found and how I'd found it. I needed to know my son's legal standing before I handed him information that would detonate the life he'd built. 2 days later, Patricia called me back with results that I had not requested and had not expected. She had pulled public records as part of a broader search standard practice when custody and paternity were potentially involved. In doing so, she had found a discrepancy in Derek Voss's birth records, a sealed filing from decades earlier, cross-referenced against estate documents that had been quietly processed after Robert's death. She read me the relevant section over the phone. I made her read it twice. Robert Callahan. My husband of 40 years, the man I had buried in the cemetery on Maple Grove Road, with yellow roses because they were his favorite, had fathered a child 4 years before we were married. A private arrangement had been made with the mother, a financial agreement structured carefully enough to survive decades without detection. The child's name, given a different surname by his mother, was Derek Allen Voss, Marcus's business partner, Serena's brother, my husband's son. I sat in my car in Patricia's parking lot for a very long time. 30 years of family court had taught me that betrayal almost never arrives in the shape you expect. It arrives sideways, through a door you thought was a wall. It arrives wearing the face of someone you loved and trusted, and the cruelest part is that the love doesn't immediately stop just because the trust has broken open. I thought about Robert. Not with anger, not yet, perhaps not ever in the way anger usually works. I thought about who he had been to me, the man who drove me to every single one of my hearings in the early years before I could afford a reliable car, who learned to make the green tea I favored after I mentioned once that I liked it, who had sat beside me when Marcus was born and wept in the uncomplicated way of someone receiving something they hadn't believed they deserved. That man had also kept a secret from me for 40 years. Both of those things were true simultaneously. I understood standing at the edge of that truth that they would remain true for the rest of my life, and that I would have to make my peace with both. What I did not have to do was protect the secret any longer. I called Marcus on a Sunday, asked him to come to my house alone, and waited for him at the kitchen table with 2 folders side by side. The evidence I had found about Eli, the documents Patricia had retrieved about Derek and Robert. When Marcus sat down across from me, he looked the way he always looks in my kitchen, younger than his age, at ease in the way that people are only at ease in places that have always meant safety. I felt the full weight of what I was about to take from him, and I chose to do it anyway, because I had spent 30 years watching what happened to people when the truth was withheld to protect someone's comfort, instead of delivered to give them the chance to choose their own life. I placed the first folder in front of him and said quietly, "I need you to read this. I'm right here. Take all the time you need." I won't describe what followed in detail because some grief is too private to narrate even now. I will tell you that Marcus sat at my kitchen table for over an hour, that he asked me 3 times if I was certain, that at some point he stopped reading and just sat with his hands flat on the table, breathing slowly the way people breathe when they are working very hard to stay present. When he finally looked up, the first thing he said was not about Serena. It was about Eli. "He's still my son," he said, "whatever the paper says." I told him I knew. I told him the paper said nothing about the 5 years of bedtime stories and Saturday mornings and the ceramic frog on the back step that Eli had painted with his small, careful hands at a birthday party 2 years ago. Marcus nodded slowly like he was filing that away somewhere important. Then I placed the second folder in front of him. I will not tell you that the conversation that followed was clean or resolved. It wasn't. Understanding that the man you called your closest friend shares your blood without either of you knowing is not the kind of revelation that settles into something comfortable in the space of an afternoon. Marcus left my house that evening with the folders under his arm and a silence around him that I recognized from my years on the bench. The silence of someone who has just been handed information they cannot unknow and understands that everything from here will be measured as either before or after this moment. He filed for divorce 3 weeks later. Serena did not contest the primary terms, which told me she had known for some time this day was coming and had made her own arrangements accordingly. The question of Eli, of who he was to Marcus legally, and in every other sense, was one they resolved privately without litigation, which was the outcome I had hoped for and quietly worked to make possible through Patricia. Derek and Marcus have not spoken since. I don't know if they ever will. I know that Derek knows the truth now because Marcus told him. What either of them does with a brotherhood that arrived 30 years too late and under these circumstances, I cannot say. Some things are beyond the reach of even the most carefully reasoned verdict. I visit Eli every Tuesday. We do puzzles and I let him beat me at checkers, and sometimes he climbs into my lap and falls asleep the way children do when they know without being told that they are safe. He calls me Grandma Dot. He has Robert's hands wide across the palm with the same short, capable fingers. I choose not to think about what that means. I think about Robert differently now than I did before, which is the honest answer, and the only kind of answer I know how to give. I think about the 40 years we had together, and I think about the 40 years of silence. And I understand that people contain more than one true thing at once. A man can be devoted and still be a coward in a different corner of himself. A woman can grieve and still be clear-eyed at the same time. I sat on the bench for 30 years because I believed the truth had inherent value, that it was worth the discomfort of receiving it, that people were owed an accurate account of their own lives even when the accounting was painful. I still believe that. I believe it more now, not less. If there is anything I would say to Robert were I able to say it, it is not what you might expect. It is not an accusation. It is simply this: you should have told me. Not because I wouldn't have loved you through it, but because you didn't trust me enough to find out. That is the part that stays with me on the quiet evenings now in the house where we raised Marcus and lived our long, ordinary life together. Not the betrayal exactly, but the assumption beneath it. The decision made alone that I could not be trusted with the truth of the man I loved. I have seen that assumption destroy 100 families from the bench. I suppose I can survive it in my own. Some silences, once they finally break open, don't need an answer. They just need to stop. If you've stayed with Dot this far, I want to know, what would you have done in her place? Would you have told Marcus everything, or would you have protected the secret your husband kept for 40 years? Leave a comment below. And if this story stayed with you the way I think it might, subscribe. There are more of these waiting for you. Real stories, complicated ones, the kind that don't tie up neatly because the true ones never do.